All right, let's talk about this class specifically. How, I tried to listen back to the last recruiting of On the Bench, so I wasn't asking just, questions you've already answered and things you've already said, but just thoughts on this class in general. What, maybe start with like a ceiling floor for this class as we stand here today, very early April.
Yeah, to me right now, it looks like I would have a tough time projecting it to be in the top 10. But like the biggest here is it's just going to matter what they do on the field, right? Like, I mean, I know that's a tired phrase by now because, we were saying that before the 2023 season and we saw how that, the recruiting results turned out then. But I think it's just mainly like they got to put themselves in the best position possible in these summer, OVs. They got like 60 set up right now. So you got to hit on as many of your, top targets during that period and then see how the season pans out. If you overachieve, like you should be in a good position. I've seen some encouraging things from this new coaching staff to make me think that like if they do succeed, they might have a better chance of cashing in on their success than the previous version of Mike Norvell's staff did, which we all know was not great. So yeah, I mean, ceiling probably like that, the like 9-10 spot, and I think like realistically it'll be top like 15 or so, just based on like how it looks today. But like I said, things go poorly in the season. Obviously, we know how that will go, and then if they overachieve, like they could sign their best class that they've had since Norvell's been here. Just it really depends how the season goes.
I know it's hard to maybe diagnose every single issue, but I've heard Bud talk a little bit about recruiting being, and maybe you have too, obviously NIL is a factor and winning is a factor, but then outside of that, relationships, energy, effort, things like that go into recruiting. What would you say about this staff is the biggest, maybe of those three, that you feel like is different?
Yeah, I think energy, and effort. Like I know, like if you guys listen to On the Bench, like I brought up how some D-line prospects specifically were mentioning that they hadn't talked much with Terrence Knighton, but that seemed to improve. Like our new thing is like, because of how last season turned out and obviously how wrong everyone was, but how wrong we were specifically about how we thought that team was going to perform. Like we want to make sure that we're pointing out things in real time, like when we notice concerning trends, I guess. And that was just something at the time, after talking to a few D-line prospects that I knew FSU was high on. They had mentioned not being in contact much with the D-line coach. So I wanted to point that out, but I do want to give credit where credit's due. Like it sounds like that's improved. And certain prospects mentioned how great of a relationship they have with T Knight. So overall with these new staffing changes, like if you go every single spot's different, right? I think some are the recruiting boards are shaping up better than others. I think like tight end, DB, like those are the two probably that stand out the most right now as really well built recruiting boards. But I still think they have room to improve on the interior D line, receiver. Like there's still some concerns there, when it comes to recruiting. But at the end of the day, it's just going to matter how they close, and we'll ultimately see the first version of that at the end of the summer. After these guys all take OVs, and then obviously can. With how the season goes, one way or another, like we'll get another look at how this staff does. Because I mean, like the staff, like last year, they were in it for a lot of top guys, but at the end of the day, it came down to them not closing on the ones they needed to. And this was before the things fell off the rails during the season, right? Like I know Chris talks about this all the time for us. Like that summer, like they missed on a lot of guys they really wanted, and we're gonna have to see them improve at that. Obviously, it's at Like they're not in it for the same caliber of players they were last year because of the difference in record they're coming off of, and that's you can't really blame this new version of the staff for that. That's not under their control, but you can evaluate them for the effort they're putting in because as we've noted, like you got to considering what they're coming off of 2-10. Like I know a lot of these guys weren't here, but you have to consider that when dealing with the landscape of recruiting and making sure that you're putting in more effort than your competitors to try and land these guys.
That was going to be my next question. Do you think, because it feels like there's less juice, right? Like when you look at the elite prospects that are or are not on campus, is that do you tie that solely to last year's record, or is new relationships a bit of a factor, or are there other things kind of in play as well? Or am I misreading that? Is the talent comparable to the last couple of years in spring and summer? I don't think I am, but is it solely the record, or do you think there's other things kind of in play there too?
I think at certain positions there's other things in play, but I think at most positions, like they're doing a pretty good job of recruiting considering the circumstance. I think a lot of these recruits are like they like Mike Norvell and like members of this staff, but a lot of it's like we're gonna have to wait and see because people are recruits and their families are concerned or just keeping an eye on what the future of Norvell's tenure is going to look like. Like, is he going to be here long term? Like, that's something that all these recruits have to take into account in making these decisions. Obviously, with the portal, I guess it's not as big of a deal as it once was because if things do go south, you can kind of get out of there. But yeah, I mean, I think overall they're doing a pretty good job of not letting the circumstance of 2-10 like hurt them too much on the trail. But you're right, like they're not in it. Like I do want to say that they're not in it for the like top to bottom same caliber of recruit that they were last off season, and that's to be expected. Like that's I wasn't expecting FSU to go and get the same level of recruit on campus that they were after 13-1. Now after 2-10, that's just not reasonable. But you do want to see them putting in a lot of effort to try and mitigate some of the the lack of talent and get themselves involved for some of those guys that they can be involved with.
I almost feel bad asking this because I feel like it's so negative, but I do feel like a big fan complaint is, man, if they weren't, and I guess it is a new staff, right? And so maybe that's the answer before I even ask the question. But I do feel like a lot of the complaint is, man, if we couldn't even close on those guys when we were winning, how in the world are we going to close now, right? And obviously winning on the field this year will help. But coming off of such a tough season, and then you kind of think about how kids commit earlier and earlier, and whether they're shutting down their recruitments or maybe still open, but they're just committing earlier these days than they ever have. It does feel, at least on the outset, that it is pretty daunting. I mean, is that an accurate assessment? I mean, I'm not trying to go completely doom and gloom here, but what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I guess the hope would be.
Hey, I'll get right back to chatting with Zach over on Spaces. If you're watching this, do me a quick favor. Make sure that you're subscribed. We've got more content coming through the spring, and then obviously through summer, we'll get Zach back on to talk recruiting. If you're already subscribed, we did this over on Spaces. Go follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you're calling it these days. It's just TJ_Pittenger. We hosted this over there on Spaces. People had the opportunity to chime in if they wanted, interact in a live time fashion, not necessarily be logged into YouTube, but make sure you're following over there if you are already subscribed here. All right, back to the video.
Two things. The hope would be that you upgraded with your coaching staff on the recruiting trail. You got better closers on the staff. We don't know that yet because they haven't really had an opportunity, at least at a larger sample size, to determine their ability to do that. But the other thing is, how has FSU changed their approach with NIL and how much they're allocating per recruit? I think that we saw an improvement with that on signing day of this past cycle. I thought they did a good job of prioritizing those, final few targets that they could, that were, like a Usman Kroma or Tylon Lee or some of these, other players that they flipped late. I thought they did a good job in that window of showcasing like, hey, like we should probably spend, and like they spent a lot for some of those guys, and it was needed, right, with how that class fell apart. But it was a good sign that they did allocate those funds towards those specific recruitments, and I think hopefully you see more of that, and just like a better usage of play, allocating that NIL money to players that they need, like at specific positions. Like I'd like to see them invest more on the D line, at these premium positions. I think that was kind of a complaint I had with how they spent last offseason. I thought they spent too much on skill. I would like to see more in the trenches, and hopefully that alongside the the ability to close better with this new look staff. We'll see them have improved results if they can win this upcoming year.
I've got two more, and then I'll open this up to questions. One is, I see this a lot, and I actually got a DM about it just now. A lot of kids talk really, really highly of Mike, and I know fans get frustrated with this, but the kids will say, "Man, this is he's my favorite coach that's recruiting me," or is a lot of that just lip service, or are they just trying to be nice, or like how does and then the kid will commit somewhere else, right? Like so if Arnaud says that and then commits, that I'm not counting that one. But kids speak so highly of him, and then for some reason end up spending 3 or 4 years somewhere else. Is that like, I'm not expecting you to have like a perfect answer of like, oh yeah, he just needs to do this one thing. But do you think that's just kids being nice, or why does that continue to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to like what if it's lip service or not. I mean, one thing you have to take into account is a lot of times when we're doing interviews with recruits, a lot of those interviews are happening on FSU's campus, and like the setting of it along with like sometimes the coaches are literally like just feet away from where the interview is taking place. Like that recruit's probably going to say nicer things about FSU just in general versus when you get him, if I just call him on the phone on a random day where he's not taking a visit. So that's something to take into account. But no, I mean, I think Norvell is very well liked with amongst recruits. Like it's not like I don't think recruits like secretly like don't like Norvell and are just saying that to say it. Like I think he is a well liked head coach by most recruits and their families. But there's a difference between just liking a coach and then signing up to play for them, and there's a lot of other factors that go into play that are outside of the head coach, right? The position coach, the coordinator, that fit, and obviously the NIL factor as well. So I don't know how much to attribute to like when a recruit does or doesn't sign up to play at FSU. Like how much is that with Norvell specifically? Like yes, we do know he impacts recruitments, but I don't know why recruits will say he's their favorite head coach and then go elsewhere. Like I attribute that more to other factors rather than the recruit maybe being misleading or something like that.
Last thing I'll ask, and then if anybody has any questions, you can pop in. If not, we'll end this thing early. So it's up to you guys. But on quarterback specifically, obviously Florida State is without a quarterback in this class. Just how do you think that's impacting recruiting some? Like just not having that bell cow that even though we didn't stick last year, like you had Trammell recruiting guys, and we've had other guys, Luke recruiting guys a couple of years ago, and being involved. Obviously, they were coming off of winning seasons in both of those recruitments too. So that it's all of it together. But do you think that's a big issue for the class in general, just not having that kind of lead guy there, and not really knowing the direction that Florida State's going to go at quarterback, after this year even? And second, just thoughts on quarterback target, tied in with that. What's next at quarterback after we've seen some other targets commit elsewhere?
Yeah, I do think that it doesn't help, right, not to have that peer recruiting aspect, which you typically find in your quarterback commit. It's been a while since FSU hasn't had a quarterback, especially during heading into quarterback committed heading into summer OVs. You had Trammell, like you said, Luke. I think the year before they had a switch up. I think that was the Chris Parson to Brock Glenn year. Great times, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure that doesn't help. It's always good to have that quarterback that's out on the 7-on-7 circuit and talking to other recruits about Florida State. Which is like you mentioned with Trammell, even though he did flip, like that was something that he was helping out with, especially early on. So, and then with the quarterback position, I mean, a lot of it's up in the air right now, like with their recruiting. Obviously they got eliminated from Bo Bentley's recruitment, who was a top target. They're trying to get Landon Duckworth, who's like the other, top tier target on campus this weekend. I got to check with Landon today to see if he's going to make it up or make it down to Tallahassee on Saturday. That would be a big deal because they need to get him on campus. Ole Miss is trending there. And then Jaden O'Neal is kind of the other one that's a top target for FSU right now that they're in it for. He's the Oklahoma commit who actually he's originally from California but moved to Oklahoma this offseason and visited FSU a few weeks ago for a spring practice. And FSU's trying to get an OV from him. That's an interesting one to me just because he doesn't really fit the mold of the quarterbacks that Malzahn and has kind of been recruiting to play in his offense historically and recently, right? Like all the guys they initially offered after losing their former commit Brady Smigel in January were all guys that were real, dual threat options. And Jaden O'Neal's not a bad athlete, but that's not the strength of his game. He's got one of the best arms in the class. So that's an interesting thing to me. Like, would Malzahn, want to add someone like that? Like, I think they probably would because O'Neal's like a really talented QB, but it is an interesting thing to watch, like where their priorities are at when it comes to these quarterback prospects and the traits and stuff. Like, I think that is one of the more intriguing things about what they're doing at quarterback. I think they do need to expand the QB board, though. I wrote that on the site a few days ago. They just need more options because right now, it feels like they're kind of on the outside looking in for, or at least they just need to make up a good amount of ground with some of these QB targets. And, it would probably be beneficial to have some other guys on the board that they can turn to if things don't work out with guys like Duckworth and O'Neal.
All right, if anybody has any questions, you can hit request real quick, and I'll give you about a minute, but then we're getting off here, so it's up to you how long we keep going. Is outside of quarterback, you kind of had mentioned trenches. Is there another room that you are we talked about, kind of being confident in tight end and feeling really good about defensive back. What's the room you're most concerned about that there is a need? Like, there's 2,000 wide receivers on the roster right now. So, like if wide receiver is a little down, you can kind of understand certain positions. But is there a room that you think they do need to recruit better outside of quarterback?
Probably offensive tackle. Obviously, we know how important that position is, and it is hard to find high school offensive tackles that are quality. But I mean, a lot of their O-line board is made up of guys that I think will probably play on the interior on the next level. So I'd like to see some more, offensive tackle targets emerge for new O-line coach Herb Hand. But yeah, I mean, that's mainly like every other position. They've done a pretty good job of setting up a board. Like even receiver as of lately, like it's gotten better. So yeah, I don't really have any other quarterback is obviously the other one. I'd like to see them expand some options. But those two are probably the main ones right now.
Zach, what else do you have coming soon that people should go check out at Noles 24/7?
This month, a lot of it's just like updating these recruitments for guys that are coming in for visits. But I mean, we got I'm trying to do more analysis stuff because I know that's something that our readers like more than just kind of the, hey, this recruit said this, which it's kind of become a little. just not as like interesting, to me too. I think, trying to do more of that. So, be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. It's trying to, what I'm trying to deliver more of on the site. But yeah, hoping that we have a good summer of recruiting and things kind of amp up ahead of the, really important 25 season.
Are you excited for week 1?
I am. That's gonna be fun. It's gonna be hot, obviously, but it's gonna be fun.
Praying for
tailgate.
Yeah, praying for an 8 p.m. so that 3:30 and that would just be. We may not. We'll have to figure something out if it's a 3:30 one because that just sounds awful. So, but all right, man. Nobody requested, so it was just me and you today. But thanks for hanging out, man. This was fun.
Appreciate you, TJ.
Thanks, bud.